Miriam Lane used to believe that quiet meant peace. There was a time when her little house on the corner of Alder Street in Harborview hummed with life. The kettle seemed always on the verge of singing, the radio murmured soft songs in the background, and the walls still carried the echo of a boy's laughter chasing a father's footsteps down the hallway. Her husband, Colin, would race home in those days. He'd park crooked in the driveway, stumble through the door with wind-tossed hair and a grin, calling out that the sunset was too beautiful to waste indoors. He smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. His tie always half loosened, his briefcase dropped by the door as if he couldn't bear even a moment's delay. He would scoop their son, Noah, into his arms, and the three of them would sit out on the back steps, sharing melted ice cream and silly, half-finished stories. Back then, the silence between them was comfortable. Pauses were filled with shared glances, easy smiles, the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Quiet was a warm blanket wrapped around all three of them. Now, quiet felt more like a locked room. The house was still the same. A square of weathered brick, a porch with flaking white paint, a tiny garden clinging stubbornly to life. But the energy inside had shifted. The hush in the evenings wasn't restful anymore. It was sharp. It pressed against Miriam's ribs, made her chest feel hollow and crowded all at once. It was the quiet of words that should have been spoken and never were. Colin came home much later these days, if he came home at all. His suits were sharper, his shoes more expensive, his cologne stronger and unfamiliar. His phone was always in his hand, always lit, messages, emails, calls at odd hours. His attention lived somewhere far away, in places she couldn't see and conversations she wasn't part of. He would walk through the front door with the same key he'd used for 20 years, but he carried himself like a visitor. A nod, maybe a muttered, "Hey," and he would drift toward the office or spare room, his eyes flicking past her as if catching on something behind her shoulder. When she asked how his day went, he'd answer with a single word, "Busy?" And that would be that. Noah, now 22, was nothing like the toddler who used to spill juice on the couch and apologize with gummy smiles. He stood taller than Miriam by a full head, his shoulders broad, his dark hair often messy from his habit of raking his fingers through it when he was thinking. His voice had deepened since those early days, but it still carried the same warmth. He had her eyes, gentle and watchful, and Colin's habit of noticing small details. He'd finished college and come back home, claiming it was temporary, just until he figured out his next steps and saved up some money. Miriam knew better. She'd seen the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he listened for the sound of Colin's car each night and then glanced toward her if the driveway remained empty. He was not just saving money, he was staying to shield her from a loneliness he didn't know how else to fight. One Thursday night, the rain came down in fine, icy threads, tracing lines down the window glass. Miriam stood at the kitchen sink, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. The fluorescent light overhead hummed softly, casting a tired glow over the room. Her reflection startled her. Faint lines had formed around her eyes, etching the story of years spent squinting into worry and forcing smiles. Her lipstick from earlier in the day had faded into a dull outline. The oversized sweater she wore hung loose on her body. It had once been Colin's favorite on her, back when he noticed such things. "When did I start looking like this?" she whispered, the words barely more than air. The clock above the stove blinked midnight. The house creaked softly with the shifting wind. Colin hadn't called. He usually sent some late text, an excuse about a meeting that ran long or a client who needed something urgent. Tonight, there was nothing. Footsteps padded softly behind her. "Mom?" She turned. Noah stood in the doorway, framed by the dim hallway light, one hand clutching a folded blanket. He looked tired, his hair tousled, a hint of stubble along his jaw. There was a softness in his gaze that reminded her of the boy who used to climb into her lap after nightmares. "Why are you still up?" he asked gently, stepping into the kitchen. "I could ask you the same," she replied, forcing a small smile. He walked over and carefully draped the blanket around her shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly of detergent and the citrusy body spray he'd used since high school. "You'll catch a cold standing here in this draft," he said. "The window leaks, you know that." She slipped her hands under the edges of the blanket, pulling it tighter around her. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she murmured. His gaze flicked toward the front door, then back to her face. "Dad's not home," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She shrugged, trying to sound casual. "He's busy at the office, you know how it is, end of quarter stuff." Noah's jaw tightened, a muscle in his cheek pulsing. "You deserve more than this," he said, almost under his breath. Her chest tightened as if his words had hooked into something soft and hidden inside her. No one had said that to her in such a long time, not her friends who had drifted away over the years, not her parents who lived in another state and rarely visited, not even herself in those quiet moments before sleep. "I'm okay," she said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. His eyes stayed on her unwavering. In them, she saw the boy who used to believe she could fix anything, and the man who now saw all the cracks she tried to hide. "Get some rest, Noah," she said softly. "It's late." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, then nodded. "All right, good night, Mom." "Good night." When he left the room, the silence pressed in again. But something was different. His concern lingered in the air, a gentle weight, a reminder that someone in this house still saw her as more than a fixture in the background. She tried to sleep, but her thoughts refused to settle. Every small sound felt amplified. The ticking clock, the wind tugging at the eaves, a distant car driving through wet streets, each noise reminded her that Colin was somewhere else, in some other room, under some other roof, his life moving along a path that no longer included her. Images flickered through her mind like scenes projected on a blank wall. Colin laughing with someone, leaning in close at a restaurant table, turning his phone face down as he smiled in a way she hadn't seen in years. She imagined a woman's hand on his arm, imagined him telling stories he used to share with her. The ache that followed felt almost physical. In the morning, the rain had softened to a mist. The house smelled faintly of coffee. Miriam entered the kitchen to find a mug on the counter and a folded note propped against it. "Don't forget breakfast. Love you. N." She picked up the note and traced the letters with her thumb. Such a small thing, a scribbled reminder, a mug left ready beside the coffee machine, yet it warmed a place inside her that had grown cold from neglect. She poured herself coffee, letting the steam rise and fog her glasses for a moment. She wished kindness didn't feel so rare. The front door opened with a reluctant squeak. Colin stepped inside, the air around him carrying the faint scent of a car interior and unfamiliar perfume. He set his suitcase down with a dull thud and tossed his keys onto the counter without looking at her. "Did you pay the water bill?" he asked, voice flat, already moving past her toward the hallway. No hello. No explanation for the empty side of the bed. No mention of where he'd been all night. Miriam's mouth opened, then closed again. The words she wanted to say, "Where were you? Who were you with? Do I still matter to you at all?" rose like a tide and then receded, leaving behind a dry shore. "It's on autopay," she said quietly. "Good," he replied, already scrolling through his phone. "We don't need the city shutting anything off." His collar was slightly crooked. There, just at the edge of the white fabric where it brushed his neck, was the faint smudge of lipstick, a color she hadn't worn in years. Her stomach twisted. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. Colin didn't notice. Or if he did, he chose not to. She said nothing. Later that afternoon, when the sky had cleared to a dull gray and the neighborhood settled into a weekday hush, Miriam sat on the front steps, a mug of lukewarm tea cradled in her hands. The maple tree in the yard had begun to turn, its leaves tinged with the first hints of orange and gold. Noah stepped outside, zipping up his hoodie as he joined her. He lowered himself onto the step beside her with a quiet sigh. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a stray cat amble across the sidewalk. The air smelled faintly of wet pavement. "Do you ever think about just starting over?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. Noah turned to look at her, surprised. "Starting over how?" She stared out at the street. "I don't know. A new town, a new place where no one knows your history, where you're not someone's wife or someone's mother, just you. Does that make any sense?" He was quiet for a beat. "Yeah," he said softly, "it does. Sometimes it feels like I'm trapped in a story that got away from me," she murmured, "and I don't know how to get it back." He studied her profile, taking in the pull of her mouth, the way her fingers tightened unconsciously around the mug. "Maybe you don't have to get it back," he said. "Maybe you get to write a new one." She huffed out a small, sad laugh. "Easier said than done." He nudged her shoulder lightly with his. "You've spent my whole life taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time you take care of yourself a little." Colin picked up his phone, grabbed his keys from the table, and stood. "I'm done," he muttered, heading for the door. "Enjoy dinner." The door slammed, the vibration echoed through the walls and into Miriam's bones. Noah stared at his plate, his shoulders tight. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I shouldn't have said anything." Miriam shook her head, feeling a strange lightness settle inside her, fragile but real. "No," she said. "Thank you." His gaze lifted, searching her face. For once, she whispered, "Someone spoke up for me." That night, Miriam lay in a bed that felt far too big. She stared at the empty space beside her, at the indentation where Colin's body used to rest, at the faint shadow cast by the lamp on his nightstand. Memory swirled around her. Their first apartment, the day they brought Noah home from the hospital, the late-night arguments that slowly replaced late-night conversations. Noah's words echoed in her head. "You deserve more than this." For the first time, she didn't dismiss the thought as selfish or foolish. She let it sit there, in the quiet, like a visitor she hadn't yet decided whether to invite in or send away. Rain tapped against the glass in a steady rhythm. She closed her eyes, feeling something shift inside her, subtle but undeniable. The next morning, Colin didn't come home. Instead, her phone chimed with a text around 8. Out of town a few days, work stuff, don't wait up, no explanation, no apology, just words as cool and impersonal as a receipt. Miriam stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She could ask where he was. She could ask why he hadn't mentioned a trip. She could demand to know who he was with. Instead, she set the phone down and walked away. What was the point of asking questions when she already knew the answers she didn't want to hear? Days slid into one another. The house grew quieter, not from lack of sound, but from lack of his presence. Miriam moved through her routines like a ghost, folding laundry, trimming the herbs on the windowsill, baking banana bread that went mostly untouched. The television murmured in the background sometimes, but she rarely followed the storylines. She found herself rearranging drawers, wiping down already clean counters, watering plants that didn't need it, anything to keep her hands busy. Through it all, Noah stayed. He started taking on small tasks without being asked, changing the light bulb in the hallway, fixing the squeaky hinge on the bathroom door, cleaning out the garage. He cooked dinner some nights, clumsily but earnestly, following recipes on his phone and laughing when the pasta turned out too soft or the rice stuck to the pot. They began walking together in the evenings. It started accidentally. The first night she'd needed fresh air, and he'd joined her without saying much. One walk turned into 2, then 3, until it fell into their days like a stitched seam, holding the edges together. One evening, the sunset spilled streaks of orange and pink across the sky, painting the clouds in soft tones. The sidewalks were damp from a recent drizzle, reflecting the colors above. "You really don't have to hang around the house this much," Miriam said as they walked past the small park at the end of their street. "I know you've got friends, a life, things you'd rather be doing." Noah shrugged lightly. "I like being here," he replied. "It's not a chore." She glanced at him, his hands tucked into his pockets, his gaze sweeping over the houses as if memorizing them. "Remember when we used to stop at the ice cream truck on this corner?" he said, pointing ahead. "You'd insist on getting the same flavor every time." She smiled, the memory rising easily. "Strawberry swirl." And Dad would tell that awful joke about the cone being on the house and point to the roof of the truck, Noah added, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever come up with. Miriam laughed softly, then fell quiet. The past and present overlapped for a moment, tender and painful all at once. For the next hour, they talked about everything but Colin. Noah told her about professors he'd admired and ones who had bored him to tears. He shared stories about roommates and group projects, about nights spent at campus diners and long drives to nowhere with friends. Miriam listened, warmed by the sound of his voice filling the space between them. In turn, she spoke about the hobbies she'd let slip away, how she used to paint watercolors in the afternoons when Noah was little, how she'd wanted to learn Italian once, but never started. He listened intently, asking questions, encouraging her to talk as if every small detail mattered. The world felt almost ordinary again. Later, back in the kitchen, Noah leaned against the counter while Miriam washed dishes. The light above the sink cast a gentle glow over the room. "You're quiet tonight," he observed. "I'm just tired," she said. "You shouldn't have to do all this alone," he replied after a moment. "The house, everything with Dad. All of it. It's not fair on you." She turned off the faucet and dried her hands on a towel, then looked at him. "Life isn't really about fair," she said gently. "People change, circumstances shift, we figure it out." His gaze softened. "You haven't changed," he said. "You're still kind, still trying. You don't deserve to be treated like you're an afterthought." Her throat tightened. She closed the distance between them and placed a hand on his arm. "You have no idea how much it means to hear you say that," she said. He gave a faint, almost shy smile. They stood there for a second too long, the weight of shared hurt and mutual care wrapping around them. It wasn't romantic. It was deeper than that, something rooted in years of being each other's constant in a house that was losing one of its anchors. Miriam stepped back first, letting her hand fall to her side. "It's late," she said softly. "You should get some sleep." He nodded. "You too, Mom." After he left the room, she caught sight of herself again in the glass door leading to the backyard. "What are we becoming?" she whispered, not because she feared something inappropriate, but because she recognized how easy it would be to lean on him too much, to let him carry weight that wasn't his to bear. The next morning, she threw herself into cleaning. She rearranged the pantry, organizing cans and jars with meticulous care. She wiped down the baseboards. She opened the lid on the old upright piano in the living room and pressed a few hesitant keys. The notes were slightly out of tune, but the sound reached back through the years. Noah appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. "Haven't heard that in a while," he said, coming closer. You used to sit here with me, Miriam murmured, pressing a simple chord. Remember, you'd bang on the keys and insist you were playing your special song. He laughed. You pretended it was good. It was terrible, she replied, smiling, but it was yours. He sat down beside her on the bench. For a moment they both stared at the keys, the black and white stretching out before them like possibilities. Dad used to laugh when we all tried to sing along and missed every note, Noah said. He'd say we were the worst choir he'd ever heard. He did, she agreed, the memory tugging at her. That feels like a lifetime ago. Days went by. Colin's absence thickened into something heavier than a simple business trip. His calls, when they came, were brief. He never shared where he was staying, never asked how she was really doing. Each "I'll be home soon" felt increasingly empty. Noah's temper simmered just under the surface. He didn't speak of his father, unless necessary, and when he did, his words came out clipped. Instead, he focused on the life slowly forming within the four walls they still had. He helped her carry in groceries, checked the oil in her aging car, and finally painted the front porch she'd been mentioning for years. The old peeling white was replaced with a gentle slate blue that made the house feel refreshed, almost hopeful. One early evening, while touching up a section of the railing, Miriam's foot slipped on a wet patch of wood. She pitched forward with a startled gasp. Noah was there in an instant, his hands catching her elbows, steadying her before she could fall. For a brief second, their faces were close, each seeing the shock in the other's eyes. "I'm all right," she said quickly, her voice shaky. He released her gently, stepping back. "I should have warned you about that spot," he said. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Thank you," she replied. "You always seem to be right there when I'm about to fall." He looked away, swallowing. "I'll finish up," he said quietly. That night, dinner was simple, soup and bread. Miriam picked at her bowl, appetite muted. Noah watched her for a moment, then stood, took her empty dish to the sink, and returned with another small serving. "You need to eat more than that," he said with gentle firmness, setting it in front of her. "You barely ate lunch." She gave him a tired smile. "You're too good to me. Someone has to be," he replied, but the words were wrapped in a soft warmth, not bitterness. They ate in companionable quiet, the rain starting up again outside, tapping against the windows like fingertips. When they finished, Miriam rose to help with the dishes, but Noah shook his head. "I've got it," he said. "Go sit down. You look exhausted." She didn't argue. She settled on the couch in the living room, the lamp casting a soft circle of light around her. For a few precious minutes, the world felt almost peaceful. The sound of running water and clinking dishes drifted in from the kitchen as a kind of lullaby. Then her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Colin. She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. After a moment, she answered, "Hello?" Laughter drifted through the speaker, a woman's laughter, bright and careless. Miriam's hand tightened around the phone. A voice she didn't recognize murmured something muffled. Then Colin spoke. "Just checking in," he said. "I'll be back in a few days." Her voice caught. "Where are you?" she asked. "Out," he replied. "Don't worry about it." Before she could respond, the line went dead. She sat there frozen, phone pressed to her ear. The laughter she'd heard clung to the edges of her mind, confirming suspicions she'd tried to keep folded in the dark. Noah stepped into the doorway, drying his hands on a towel. "Mom, what happened?" he asked, reading her expression. "Nothing," she said automatically, her voice fragile. "It's fine," he frowned. "He's with someone, isn't he?" "Noah, you don't have to protect him," he said, his tone softer than his words. "You don't deserve this, not from him." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to talk about it," she whispered. "Please." He nodded reluctantly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He lowered himself onto the edge of the armchair nearby, close but not crowding her. They sat in silence, while the rain grew heavier, drum beats against the house. Later that night, Miriam found herself by the front window again, watching the storm. The sky flashed occasionally with distant lightning, illuminating the street in quick bursts. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something, though she didn't yet know what. Her phone buzzed on the table behind her, lit by a flash of lightning. She turned and picked it up, a notification from their shared credit card, Colin Lane, Silver Pines Lodge, room charge, guest, Jenna Morales. The text was simple, transactional, but it was more brutal than any argument, more final than any shouted admission. It was proof, and unlike evasive words, proof didn't pretend to be anything else. Her heart hammered in her chest as she stared at the screen. She'd known deep down, the late nights, the distracted gaze, the phantom perfume clinging to his coat. But there was something different about seeing another woman's name attached to their money, their life. Jenna. The name burned into her memory. Her hands shook as she set the phone on the table. She pressed her palms against her eyes, willing the tears to stop. When she lowered them, Noah was standing in the doorway again, his face pale. "You okay?" he asked. You look like you've seen a ghost." "He's at a hotel," she managed, "with someone. Her name is Jenna." His eyes darkened, his expression hardening. "He doesn't deserve you," he said, the words edged with anger. "Please," she said, voice breaking, "don't let this turn you bitter. Don't let what he's done live inside you like that. Hating him won't fix anything, it'll just hurt you." "How can I not be angry?" he demanded, though his tone remained controlled. "He walked away from you, from us, and you're still trying to protect him." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at him, the boy she had raised, now a man standing in front of her, carrying pain he hadn't asked for. She reached out and touched his arm lightly. "I'll be all right," she whispered. "I just need time." Time, she knew, couldn't erase betrayal, but maybe it could reshape the way it lived in her. The next morning, Colin came home as if nothing had changed. He set his briefcase down, shrugged off his coat, and headed toward the kitchen. "Morning," he muttered. "Where were you?" Miriam asked, her voice steady but soft. He didn't look at her. "Business trip," he said. "You saw the message." "At the Silver Pines Lodge," she added. There was the briefest flicker of something in his eyes, panic perhaps, or guilt. He smoothed it over almost immediately. "What are you talking about?" he asked, feigning confusion. "Don't lie to me," Miriam said quietly. "Not about this. I saw the notification. I saw her name." He rubbed his forehead. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was dinner with a client, that's all." "A client who checks into a hotel under our card?" she asked. An almost laugh escaped her brittle. "A client named Jenna Morales?" The silence that followed was heavy. Noah stepped into the doorway. "Stop lying," he said, his voice low but clear. "Just stop. This is between your mother and me," Colin snapped, turning to face him. "Stay out of it." "No," Noah replied. "Not this time. I'm not going to stand here and watch you tear her down and pretend everything's fine." "Noah," Miriam said quickly, fear twisting in her stomach. "Please." Colin pointed a finger at their son. "You don't talk to me like that. I'm still your father." "Then act like it," Noah shot back. The words hung in the air, electric. Colin's face went rigid. He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair and headed for the door. "You'll regret this," he said, not specifying who he meant. The door slammed behind him, the echo reverberating through the house. Miriam sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "What are we?" she whispered. "What's left of us?" Noah lowered himself beside her, leaving a respectful space, his hands clasped between his knees. "Maybe this is what it looks like when something that was already broken finally stops pretending it isn't," he said quietly. She looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. "Start over with what?" she asked. "Everything feels shattered." "Not everything," he said, meeting her gaze. There was a steadiness there that reminded her of the boy who used to build towers out of blocks and insist they could always be rebuilt no matter how many times they fell. That evening, Colin returned, his expression hard, his patience clearly gone. He stood in the doorway of the living room, arms folded. "We need to talk," he said. Miriam sat up straighter. "There's nothing left to say," she replied. "You're letting him get in your head," Colin said, jerking his chin in the direction of Noah's room. "He doesn't understand how marriage works. He's a kid." "He's not a kid," Miriam said, her voice rising for the first time in a long time. "He's the one who's been here. He's the one who's actually seen what this house has become." From down the hallway, Noah appeared. "Don't yell at her," he said, his posture firm but calm. Colin's mouth twisted. "Oh, and now you're her guardian angel," he sneered. "You think you know everything just because you've spent a few months playing house?" The words were meant to sting, and they did, but not in the way he intended. Miriam stepped between them, her heart pounding. "Enough," she said. "This ends here." "You want it to end?" Colin shot back. "Fine," he snatched his keys from the table. This time Miriam didn't follow him. She didn't plead or bargain or apologize for feelings she had every right to own. The sound of his car pulling away faded down the street. The house exhaled. Later that night, Miriam sat in the dim living room, her hands clasped in her lap. Noah approached quietly. "You okay?" he asked, sinking onto the sofa beside her. "I will be," she replied, "just not tonight." He didn't try to offer easy answers. He simply sat close enough that she could feel his presence, warm, solid, real. After a moment, he reached out and gently took her hand. For a brief span of time, the world narrowed to that small connection, her son's hand around hers, their breathing falling into a similar rhythm. It wasn't romantic and it wasn't misplaced. It was the kind of grounded, steady love born from years of shared moments, from scraped knees and late-night fevers and whispered encouragements. When she realized how tightly she was gripping his fingers, she let go, wiping at her eyes. "This isn't fair to you," she said. "You shouldn't have to be the one holding me together." "You've spent my whole life doing that for me," he replied. "I'm just returning the favor." "Happiness doesn't come from letting someone else hold all your broken pieces," she said softly. "It comes from learning how to carry them yourself, I think." "Then we'll figure out how to carry them together," he said, "until you're ready to carry more of them on your own." His words weren't romantic in the slightest. They were something deeper, an honest declaration of loyalty, a son promising his mother that he would not abandon her in her most vulnerable chapter. In the days that followed, Colin's absence became more permanent than temporary. There were no more promises to be home soon, no more attempts to smooth over the cracks with distracted smiles. Miriam took steps she'd been afraid to even imagine before. She found a lawyer, filled out forms, and sat in quiet offices with walls lined with framed degrees. Her hands shook as she signed certain papers, but she didn't pull back. Noah came.